Before we dive into today's story, let's meet our hero, Ceres. He's your classic good guy. Honorable, determined, he has the whole package. But recently he activated a system that's, well, let's just say it's a bit weird. Basically, whenever he targets someone, he will stir up their deepest emotions. What exact kind of emotions are we talking about, you ask? Well, hang tight and let's find out. Our honorable Ceres tries his best to avoid using it. But today, it's a bit different, because he and his team are currently knee-deep in trying to beat this dungeon. Except, things aren't going smoothly at all. Everyone was running around like headless chickens, completely freaking out. Turns out, they've become bait for something way worse than they bargained for. For example, this massive demonic mommy. Demonic lady. She's standing there in the middle of the chaos, casually dropping the corpse of a human hero like it's yesterday's garbage. And she is very disappointed, as if she expected way more from these weaklings. Honestly, compared to her mighty demon king husband, these so-called human heroes are just laughable to her. Oh, and she's getting way too excited thinking about her husband. Did I mention she's his queen? Meet Yog, the demon king's top lady. Meanwhile, back with Ceres, he's got a problem of his own. A D-rank hero named Bella is lying next to him, begging him to get out of there. The monster they're up against is on a whole other level. And with Ceres being an F-rank hero, this is the worst place he could be at. However, Ceres isn't about to run away now. If he's made it this far, there's no way he's backing down at the critical moment. He turns around and tells Bella to relax, saying he got this in the bag. Meanwhile, Yog stretches lazily, clearly unimpressed with the weak humans in front of her. She's so bored she can hardly be bothered. But at that exact moment, Ceres, our noble and righteous hero, starts getting a nosebleed. Even so, he still declares he's definitely not running away. Bella, on the other hand, is freaking out even more, thinking that just standing in front of this monster is making his body give out. She's basically begging him to run while he still can. And then, just as things seem bad enough, the goblins hanging around the queen finally notice there's another human in the room. Without missing a beat, Yog led the way and charged at him, already planning to use his head as a fancy goblet for her beloved demon king. But Ceres, on the other hand, is calm as ever, because he's just activated his system and locked on to his target. As the demon queen's claw reaches for him, the system kicks into gear. Next thing you know, Yog grabs Ceres by the head. But instead of crushing him, she actually kisses him? Yep, she lifts him up and plants one right on him. The system notified, kiss complete, attack power plus 100. I know what you're thinking because Bella's face says it all. What in the world just happened? Even the goblins are frozen in place, staring at their queen as they too have no clue what's going on. Meanwhile, Ceres, ever the opportunist, breaks free, stylishly wipes his mouth and slices down the nearest goblin in one smooth move. Meanwhile, Yog is blushing and suddenly jumps back several meters. Ceres, of course, is playing it cool, not even acknowledging Bella's confused stare. Meanwhile, the queen's heart is racing. What just happened? She was supposed to kill him, but somehow it turned into a makeout session. And then, in true hero fashion, Ceres shouts dramatically, "For the safety of the people, he will sacrifice his body if he has to." The two goblins exchange glances, suddenly remembering the rumors that their queen had been sneaking around with someone on the side. They just never expected her side piece to be a human. One of the goblins suddenly snapped, shouting at them, asking, how dare they question the queen's love for the king? Only filthy humans will ever cheat. Meanwhile, Yog's heart was still racing, and her face was beet red. She couldn't believe she'd actually kissed a human. There was no way she could let Demon King ever find out about this. At the same time, her lust index had just hit 15%. Without wasting any more time, she barked out a command to her goblin lackeys to kill that human. Ceres, sword in hand, readied himself for battle. The first goblin came charging at him, swinging a massive axe that shattered his sword in a single hit. Oh great! No weapon! Now what? Ceres didn't have time to process the situation because another goblin was already rushing him. He ducked just in time, dodging the blow. His defense was still weak, but hey, at least he had that 100-point attack boost. Grabbing what was left of his broken sword, he slashed at the goblin's weapon and, surprisingly, cut it in half. But before he could celebrate, another goblin seized the moment and sprinted toward Ceres from behind. Sensing the attack, Ceres spun around and, with a powerful strike, sent the goblin flying. Bella's jaw practically hit the floor. How is an F-rank hero doing this? She wondered. It didn't make any sense. Ceres thought he'd sliced the goblin clean in half, but nope. He had only managed to scratch its skin. Just as he started to realize his limitations, a gust of wind hit him hard. He looked up and saw the Demon Queen herself coming down on him with a powerful kick. Instinctively, Ceres raised his arms to block. The impact was so strong it shattered the ground beneath him, sending rocks flying everywhere. Even Bella was knocked back by the force. The goblins? They were grinning from ear to ear, thinking the queen had finally subdued the pesky human. One goblin lifted its axe, charging straight for Ceres, only to get swatted away by the queen's tail. The other goblins stared at their queen, completely confused as they watched her sitting on top of the human. What's going on here? They all had the same question. The queen, however, wasn't having it. She ordered that no one be allowed to touch Ceres, followed up by saying anyone who disobeys dies. She then licked her lips, ready to personally teach this human a lesson. Meanwhile, her lust index was climbing dangerously close to 91%. The goblins were practically bouncing with excitement, thinking, finally, the queen's gonna finish this guy off. In the next moment, the queen grabbed Ceres by the head and opened her mouth wide. But instead of a death blow, Ceres felt something warm. Perhaps it's a bite in his ear, and followed up with some very intense slurping. The system chimed in, defense plus 50. Ceres knew all too well that this was the price of his new powers. But for someone as righteous as him, this was beyond humiliating. Yet when it came to protecting the people of the city, what was a little shame, right? Just suck it up, he told himself, but I'm pretty sure he's enjoying this. Anyway, Yog, on the other hand, couldn't believe what she was doing. She had no idea why her body was betraying her like this, and soon she was slowly kissing Ceres' neck. And just like that, the system pinged again. Agility, plus 120. By now, even the goblins were getting flustered. Wait a second, one thought. Isn't the queen supposed to kill him? But it sure didn't look like that was what was happening. Not all the goblins were clueless, though. One of the sharper ones could tell that the queen was searching for a weak point, trying to break this human down bit by bit. As Ceres' stats kept rising, he decided he'd had enough. He couldn't take it any longer. With a determined shout, he raised his broken sword, ready to strike back. But before he could swing, the queen's tail wrapped around his arm, and with one swift motion, she grabbed him by the throat and slammed him into the wall. The goblins erupted into cheers, thrilled to see the human finally put in his place. But something was definitely off with Yog now. Her body was acting weird, and it was getting harder for her to control herself. She looked down at the puny human in front of her. How dare he challenge them? Her hands slowly gripped Ceres' armor, and with one quick motion, she tore it apart like it was made of paper. Let everyone see how weak this human body is, or so she told herself. But deep down, she couldn't help but be curious to see that six-pack underneath. Meanwhile, the goblins in the back were still cheering her on, convinced she was just humiliating the human even further. Ceres, on the other hand, was shocked. She just ripped through his armor like it was nothing. And now her hand was slowly reaching out again, her eyes starting to glaze over. In her mind, she kept chanting, "I can resist, I can resist." But then a bit of drool slipped out of her mouth, as if something deep inside her was bubbling to the surface. She kept telling herself she could hold it together, but her lust index had just hit 100%. With both hands now on Ceres' cheeks, he could feel her strength, but there was no way he could break free. All he could do was watch her slowly get closer. He reached out with one hand, realizing he was still too weak to fight these monsters. Bella, watching from the side, had no idea what to think anymore. Are they still fighting?" she muttered, her face turning super red. Ceres closed his eyes, accepting his fate. If he has to sacrifice himself to save the city, so be it, he thought, bracing himself. With his hands gripping the queen's head, the system started going haywire. Agility plus 200, defense plus 300, intelligence plus 830, endurance plus 900. His stats were shooting past the 4-digit mark, faster than he could keep up with. And just as things were reaching their peak, the Demon King himself, Bartley, arrived on the scene. He stood there, frozen, taking in the sight before him. His giant sword slipped from his hand, clanging to the ground as he stared at his queen, his wife, straddling a human, with a rather questionable expression on her face. At the same time, everyone turned to look at him. Bartley blinked a few times in disbelief. What the hell is going on here?" he stammered. Just then, the system notified Ceres. Demon King Bartley received emotional damage. All stats doubled, level increased by 1. A flash of golden light fell on Ceres, but before he could make sense of it, the Demon King's furious roar filled the air. "I'm going to kill you!" Bartley bellowed, his rage shaking the ground beneath him. The very stones at his feet shattered as raw power erupted from his body. The Demon Queen glanced at him, quickly trying to explain, "It's not what you think." But Ceres, ever the determined hero, picked up his broken sword once more. He knew he wasn't strong enough yet, but that didn't mean he was backing down. With another enraged roar, the Demon King shouted, "Stay away from my queen!" and charged at him. In one swift motion, Bartley sent Ceres flying through the air like a rag doll, crashing hard into the ground. Bella looked worried, but Ceres, though shaken, slowly got up. Good news is that he was not injured. However, this guy's speed and power are off the charts, he thought, glancing up just in time to see Bartley turning back to his wife. His voice trembled as he said, "You promised there wouldn't be a next time. Why? Why did you do this again?" Ceres, on the other hand, finally noticed Bartley was an A rank. The queen didn't respond right away. She just sighed heavily. Bartley was shaking, not from anger, but from hurt. He couldn't understand why his queen had done this to him again. And while he kept bombarding her with questions, the queen finally snapped. She screamed that this was all Bartley's fault. She asked him where he was this whole time and why he was always late. Did he know that she almost had to go back to her old self because he wasn't around? The Demon King froze. So did the goblins. Everyone stared at the queen as she stood up, pointing an accusing finger at Bartley, saying if only he hadn't been late, she wouldn't have been in this mess to begin with. And now he has the nerve to come here and question her? Bartley's eyes went wide, and he opened his mouth to argue, but one look at his furious queen made him think twice. His shoulders slumped, and he quickly apologized. Saying he was sorry explained that he only went after those fleeing humans first, and swear that he will never be late. The goblins, watching this exchange, couldn't help but be in awe. "Man, the king really loves the queen," one of them whispered. "No wonder we're still single. We've got to learn from the Demon King." One of the goblins even decided he was going to confess his love to Miss Shadir tomorrow. Meanwhile, everyone seemed to have forgotten about Ceres, who, after quickly assessing the situation, realized he had no chance of beating the Demon King. Maybe he should try to sneak out. While the Demon King was busy comforting the queen, Ceres quietly helped Bella to her feet, and the two of them tried to sneak away unnoticed. The queen was still fuming at the king, saying if he wasn't late, she wouldn't have almost been seduced by a human. Their pure, loyal love was nearly tarnished. She just kept on ranting. Bartley continued to apologize, growling about that damn human and turning around ready to hunt him down. Just as he was about to act, the queen suddenly hugged him and said she was joking, as if she'd ever fall for anyone else, as he is her only love and only king. Bartley paused, slightly relieved, but then noticed the two humans making their escape. He whipped around, furious, and yelled at his goblins, "Why didn't you all stop them?" The goblins explained the queen told them not to interfere. "You brainless idiots!" Bartley roared and shot off in a blur, heading straight for Ceres and Bella. Before they could react, the Demon King appeared in front of them, eyes blazing with murderous intent. His glare was fixed on Ceres. "So this is the human who dared to seduce my beloved." In one powerful swing, Bartley sent Ceres flying again, crashing right back down, this time conveniently landing just beside Yogg. Ceres felt his ribs crack, pain shooting through his body. He couldn't even follow Bartley's movements. The Demon King was far too fast. Before Ceres could catch his breath, Bartley charged again, determined to slice him in two. "This is the price you pay for flirting with my queen," he thought. Ceres, realizing he had no other options left, activated his system one more time. It locked onto Yogg just as Bartley's massive sword came within millimeters of his face. Then, Yogg slapped Bartley right across the face. The sword skimmed Ceres's cheek and slammed into the ground beside him. Bartley was stunned. Yogg had just hit him to protect a human, and she even shouted at him to not hurt this human. Bartley stared, speechless, as Ceres scrambled to his feet and bolted toward the exit. Tears welled up in the Demon King's eyes. "Why, my queen? Why are you protecting him? You really do care about him, don't you?" he whimpered, his voice shaking. The system chimed again. Demon King Bartley received another emotional damage, level increased, all stats increased. But even with his level boost, Ceres knew he still couldn't take on Bartley. Running is still the best option here. As Ceres fled, the queen's eyes grew hazy with desire. Her thoughts were fixated on the human. She couldn't resist any longer. She needed him. Bartley, still in disbelief, blinked as he heard her mutter, "I want that human's body." What? My queen, what are you saying?" Bartley stammered, horrified. She had just promised that he was her one and only. Grabbing her arm, he tried to stop her, but she swiftly yanked it away, and without giving him a chance to react, rushed after Ceres, leaving the Demon King standing there, utterly defeated. "I can't hold back anymore. I want to let loose." With that, Yog launched herself at Ceres, pinning him to the ground. The system notifications went wild, and stats climbed like crazy. Ceres' attributes were skyrocketing, but at what cost? Meanwhile, the Demon King stood frozen in disbelief. "No!" he cried out in agony. Behind them, Bartley was desperately trying to win back his queen, even pleading, saying it's all his fault, and he will kill the human, and everything will go back to normal. But the queen shot him a furious glare. "Tell him to get lost, and don't he dare interrupt them." Bartley felt his heart shatter into a million pieces. Dropping to his knees, he let out another scream. "No!" The system chimed in again. "Demon King Bartley is in total despair. Level increased by 5. Bella, seeing Ceres in trouble, rushed over, determined to save him. But before Ceres could warn her, it was too late. The queen's tail lashed out, grabbing Bella and slamming her into the wall without a second thought, then continued her slurping. The queen couldn't understand why she was acting this way. This wasn't like her at all. But she knew for a fact, all she wants right now was Ceres. On the other side of the room, the Demon King slowly stood up, his entire body trembling. He picked up his sword, muttering over and over, "It's a lie. It's all a lie. This can't be happening. I won't accept it." He wasn't about to give up. With a roar, he charged toward them, ready to end it all. But just as he was about to strike, the queen suddenly turned to face him. His sword froze mid-swing. He couldn't bring himself to do it. He still loved her, more than anything. One look from her, and all his resolve crumbled. He dropped his sword, once again totally defeated. Oh man, poor Demon King. I kind of feel bad for him. Anyway, Yog didn't even give him a second glance. She just went right back to what she was doing. Bartley's entire world came crashing down. All the strength drained from his body as a tremendous energy started leaking from him. The system beeped. "Warning! Demon King Bartley is about to self-destruct. Level increased by 3. Yog felt the surge of power and realized what was happening. Meanwhile, the goblins began to panic, as they didn't want to get blown to bits. They scrambled in every direction. Then, with a final system notification, Ceres hit level 10. A new skill had been unlocked. In an instant, Ceres grabbed his broken sword, his body moving on pure instinct as he activated his newly unlocked skill, Instant Slash. The blade flashed through the air and sliced cleanly across the Demon King's neck. Bartley's body collapsed, and the self-destruct countdown stopped. Ceres realized that as long as he kept leveling up, he could unlock even more powerful abilities. Yog, however, looked at the fallen king in confusion. He never reacted this way the first time? Shouldn't he have gotten used to this by now? Why is he freaking out even worse? She scoffed internally, calling him a soft-hearted fool. But before she could process her thoughts, Bartley, now headless, suddenly lunged at her, grabbing her tightly. She let out a startled gasp, so shocked she released Bella. Ceres dashed forward, catching Bella just in time. Meanwhile, the Demon King's low, eerie voice echoed from his decapitated body. "Yog, keep our promise. Come with me." The system blared again. "Warning! Demon King Bartley is about to self-destruct." Yog thrashed against his grip, desperately shouting, "Let me go!" But Bartley's hold only tightened. In the next moment, another flash of sword light tore through the air. Ceres had sliced off the Demon King's arm and yanked Yog back to safety. Bartley, once again completely defeated, looked one last time at his queen. He called out her name for one last time, and then a massive explosion rocked the entire dungeon. The shockwave shattered the floor, sending Ceres, Bella, and Yog plummeting down to the lowest level. However, during their fall, something strange happened as Yog's body began to break apart. Some time passed, and Ceres struggled to sit up, and that's when he noticed a small creature lying on his chest. The small creature blinked its wide eyes at Ceres, and that's when the system finally informed him this tiny lizard was the true form of Yog. Barely processing what was going on, Yog, in her lizard form, gave him a glance, and then darted straight into his pants. Bella, meanwhile, stirred awake, groaning as she felt discomfort all over. She had no idea where she was, nor where Ceres went. Ever the righteous hero, Ceres naturally wasn't focused on Bella's cake. Instead, his attention was on the system notification flashing before him. He'd received a map as a reward for defeating Bartley. You might be asking what about his nosebleed? Oh, that was definitely from the internal injuries he'd sustained during the battle. Yep, absolutely nothing else. Ceres hesitated for a moment. Should he open the map right now or wait? Bella, finally noticing him, scrambled to move, embarrassed. Meanwhile, Ceres made up his mind and accepted the map reward. Once activated, the map revealed every detail of the dungeon. The pathways, traps, hidden resources, and even the locations of the bosses. Perfect. Now they wouldn't get lost in this maze. Bella watched him curiously, wondering what he was staring at. But of course, only Ceres could see the system interface. After helping her to her feet, Ceres prepared to move forward. However, before they could get very far, a sharp pain suddenly ripped through his chest. He gasped and coughed up a large amount of blood, except it wasn't red. It was purple. His veins bulged, turning a deep, unnatural purple as the pain shot through his arm. Ceres cried out in agony as his pinky finger started to break down. Bella had no idea what was happening, horrified as she watched him writhe on the ground, screaming in pain. The next moment, sharp rocks nearby sliced open his skin, and from the cuts, purple liquid oozed out. Bella rushed to him, wrapping her arms around him in an effort to comfort him, unable to bear seeing him suffer like this. She could feel how feverish his body was, burning up under her touch. After a few agonizing seconds, Ceres's pinky had mostly vanished, and he was left gasping for breath. The pain had subsided, but he looked completely drained. Bella, filled with concern, asked what had happened to him and why his body was reacting like this. Ceres sighed heavily, finally confessing, saying he's been poisoned. Well, how did this happen? Let me take you back. To exactly 6 months ago, the city Ceres was in was attacked by powerful monsters. There was one hero fighting the monsters, however. He was guarding a mysterious box. But during the fight, the box was struck, unleashing an overwhelming surge of energy. Ceres had been caught in the blast, flung through the air like a rag doll, landing himself in a pit. From the box, a strange purple liquid began to spill out, which also caused the sky to turn crimson, the air thick with a choking stench, and shortly after, both the hero and the monsters began to scream in torment. The hero and the monsters, completely drenched in the strange purple liquid, quickly began to melt, their bodies disintegrating into nothing. Ceres had managed to hide under the rubble, avoiding direct contact, but the foul-smelling air had already invaded his lungs, filling his entire body with pain. When he woke up, he was in a hospital bed. The doctors delivered grim news. He had only 1 year left to live. Just as the reality of his situation began to sink in, a system window appeared in front of him. It spoke of a cure. The blood of the demon god could cleanse him of the poison. At that moment, Ceres had no idea what this mysterious window was or what it meant. But then it prompted him again. Do you wish to bind to the system and become a player? Gain access to the blood of the demon god? With no other option, and desperate to survive, Ceres decided to take a chance. He hit confirm. That's when the system told him where he could find the cure. The blood of the demon god lay deep within this very dungeon. As Ceres finished telling Bella his story, he purposely left out the part about the system. Some things were just too hard to explain. Ceres, still shaky, asked Bella to help him to the next room, saying, there should be clothes and weapons in there. Meanwhile, in another part of the dungeon, a group of heroes cautiously entered a dimly lit room. Everyone moved carefully, but the tank leading the way wasn't careful enough. His foot pressed down on a hidden mechanism, and in the next second, he knew he was in trouble. A beam of light shot out, cutting straight through his shield and then his head. Then he crumpled to the ground, lifeless. Seeing one of their guys fall, the group froze. Their vice captain, a B-rank hero named Tyler, quickly commanded everyone to not move. Everyone stood rigid, not wanting to activate any more traps. But the death of their tank? It didn't seem to faze them much. Instead, they exchanged glances, not of grief but frustration. Great, the only tank is down. What now? They had come this far and no one wanted to turn back empty-handed. That's when their captain, Hills, stepped forward, as the only A-rank hero in the group. However, the dude was ruthless. You, he said, pointing at the weakest member of the group, a D-rank named Maxwell. The old rule of the team was clear. When in danger, send the weakest forward as bait. Maxwell's heart sank. His legs wobbled as the other members shoved him toward the front. Hills drew his sword and gave his chilling order. Go, find the safe path, now. Maxwell didn't want to, but defying the captain's orders was a death sentence. As he was about to take a step, Tyler from the group pulled out a thing he just made saying, "This should help, and it can bounce ahead and reveal the traps for them." However, Hills slashed the thing in half, glaring at the man, telling him if he sees any more of his useless toys, he will kill him. Tyler let out a sigh, head hanging low, and retreated back into the group. Hills barked at Maxwell again. With shaky legs, Maxwell took his first step forward. Luckily, nothing happened. He exhaled in relief. But now came the real choice, left or right. Sweat drenched him as he stared down the two tiles. His mind raced. Which was safe? Which would kill him? "Stop wasting time!" Hills yelled at him, which obviously didn't help. Maxwell lifted his foot again. "Please let this be the right one," he prayed. He stepped forward, safe again. But Hills wasn't impressed, just told him to keep going. Internally, Maxwell screamed, "I'm going to die! I can't do this anymore!" Clearly, he was at his breaking point. Suddenly, without thinking, Maxwell bolted. He turned and ran in the opposite direction, crying out that he wanted to go home. As Maxwell ran, panic completely overtaking him, he didn't notice that he was no longer retracing his steps. His foot slammed down on an untested stone tile, and in an instant, a laser shot up from the ground, piercing straight through his skull. The group froze, surprised by how fast it had happened. It seemed that the traps didn't just target the same spots. Hills glanced briefly at Maxwell's lifeless body and then turned to the rest of the group, ordering the next lowest rank to step forward. Before anyone could move, something unexpected happened. The large door ahead of them creaked open. Hills spun around, and to his surprise, it was Ceres on the other side. Hills blinked in disbelief. Ceres is part of the bait group? They should have all been dead. His mind raced. Had Ceres somehow defied his orders? He was supposed to be cannon fodder, a distraction from the dungeon's traps and monsters. How could he still be alive? The group turned to see Ceres standing at the entrance with Bella beside him, both looking surprisingly unharmed. Tyler was overjoyed at the sight of Bella, but Hills was less than impressed. His eyes settled on Ceres, questioning how this useless piece of trash was still alive. Ceres, however, looked at Hills as if looking at a fool. As memories of the day before their mission flooded back, Ceres almost laughed out loud. Hills had cornered him back then, sword in hand, practically fuming with rage. He had demanded to know how Ceres knew the color of his wife's underwear. Ceres had tried to explain himself, telling Hills that it was part of his combat training to sharpen his instincts. He tells him that he can sense everything around him. Colors, movements, objects, all of it. But Hills didn't believe a word of it, accusing Ceres of sleeping with his wife. Things had almost gotten violent. The only thing that had stopped him was his bodyguard stepping in, reminding Hills that killing someone in the city was a serious crime. Ceres, being the righteous man he was, wouldn't let anyone question his integrity. He decided it was time to demonstrate the results of his training. Without hesitation, he pointed at each person in the room and confidently revealed their underwear colors. There was a brief moment of stunned silence before the person wearing nothing suddenly changed their mind and announced, "All right, let's kill him right now." Tensions flared again, but the others quickly intervened, reminding everyone that murder in the city could lead to complications they really didn't want. That's when they hatched a better plan. Ceres would be sent to the bait group, let the dungeon take care of him. Back to the present, Ceres and Bella had just finished changing into some fresh gear in one of the dungeon rooms. They weren't expecting to bump into the expedition team here, but it seemed the group had gotten lost. Hills, standing with his usual arrogance, pointed at Ceres and ordered him to come over. Ceres looked at Hills like he was looking at a complete idiot. It didn't take long to realize Hills was gaining by using lower-ranked members to trigger traps. It was then Tyler came up with a better idea. What if they just retrace the exact path that Ceres and Bella had already taken? They could avoid the traps altogether. No need to risk more lives. But Hills wasn't having it, since he believed that they already lost too many valuable members in this C-rank dungeon. They can't afford to backtrack or waste more time. He glared at Tyler. If he doesn't like his idea, he should take the lead. Tyler again fell silent. Hills then turned back to Ceres, saying Ceres trained his intuition so well, now's the time to make himself useful and contribute to the team. Ceres, not particularly bothered by Hill's sarcasm, but still agreed. Then pulled up the map in his system. Bella, knowing the room was full of traps, immediately grew worried, telling Ceres they can find another way, no need to risk it. But Ceres just gave her a reassuring smile. It's the captain's orders after all. Don't worry, I'll be fine. Without any hesitation, Ceres took his first step forward. The rest of the team gasped in horror. Was this F-ranked guy really about to walk straight into a death trap using just his intuition? But nothing happened. Ceres took another step, and then another. By now, the entire team was staring in disbelief. This was the third step, and somehow he hadn't triggered anything yet. Wow, the guy's got incredible luck, someone muttered. Hills, however, looked furious. His face grew darker with every step Ceres took, and then, to everyone's surprise, Ceres stopped, turned around, and took another step backward. With every step, Ceres moved without hesitation. The team watched in stunned silence. Is this really just luck? Or did he somehow know the right path? It didn't make sense. Just figuring out the layout of the first half of the dungeon had cost them multiple intelligence agents. How could an F-rank possibly know the way? And then suddenly, Ceres jumped, an unexpected, bold leap forward. The group collectively held their breath, certain this was the moment his luck would run out. He wobbled a bit upon landing, almost losing his balance, but still, no traps triggered. Hills stared at him in confusion, his frustration growing. How has he not set off a single trap? Meanwhile, Ceres smirked, looking down at the map in his system. It had just given him the next step. Move 5 spaces forward. Almost there. Without a word, he casually stepped over the bodies of the 2 corpses littering the floor, making his way toward Hills. Everyone was in shock. Was this truly luck, or had his intuition been real all along? As Ceres reached Hills, he couldn't resist adding one last jab. See, Captain? That's my intuition in action. Just like I told you, I've always been able to sense things, which means I'm also clearly innocent when it comes to your wife. It was like pouring salt into Hills' already festering wound. Furious, Hills snapped. His sword was suddenly at Ceres' throat, eyes burning with rage, telling him to not give him that crap. There's no such thing as intuition. Ceres is just lucky, and luck will run out. Hills sounded super salty, but from now on, he will have Ceres lead the way. Soon, everyone made it safely to the other side, but just then, Ceres spotted some mushrooms on the ground. The system informs him that these mushrooms can boost stamina for demonic monsters, but if the mushrooms were eaten by humans, then they'd be running to the bathroom in no time. Now, remembering Yog, Ceres figures she must have been hungry, so he plans to grab some for her to eat. He bends down, pulls one out, and give it a sniff. Surprisingly, it smells pretty good. Too bad he can't have any. But before he knows it, Hills notices and snatches the mushroom right out of his hand. No questions asked. The dude just shoves it into his mouth and declares that everything in this dungeon belongs to the Heroes Guild and his own team. Ceres, on the other hand, doesn't have the right to take anything. Afterwards, he then orders Ceres to stick in front of the group. Ceres doesn't even get mad. He gives a little salute and says that's not a problem, and he will always be in the front and promises that Hills will never see him behind him. Hills, caught off guard by his attitude, wasn't sure how to respond. Meanwhile, Bella is over there getting patched up by the team's healer. Tyler, feeling all guilty, says he didn't know she'd been assigned to the bait group. Bella, however, tells him that she actually volunteered. Tyler stares at her, shocked, while asking her why would she do that. Bella didn't answer. Instead, she glanced over at Ceres, who was now explaining to Hills that one of the doors leads to the final boss, and the other doors are dead ends. Her leg heals up pretty quickly, but Tyler notices the look in her eyes. He gets all serious and says, if Bella was just trying to protect that F-ranked guy, she's basically signing up for a death wish. The reason why they called it the bait group is because the group is made up of the lowest-ranking heroes, basically all cannon fodders. If they survive, great, but if not, well, at least they served their purpose. Tyler tells Bella to stop doing stupid stuff like that, and that from now on, she's sticking with him. Meanwhile, Ceres explains to Hills that there's no trap behind the door. They can just walk through. But Hills, being cautious, orders Ceres to open it instead. Clearly, he's not trusting Ceres completely, and he's definitely not risking it himself. Ceres walks up to the door, puts both hands on it, and starts pushing. Everyone else is on high alert, weapons drawn. But suddenly, Hills' stomach starts grumbling. Quite loudly, too. His gut does a full-on somersault, and he almost drops his sword. Right then, the door creaks open. No traps, no monsters, but there's this weird smell in the air. Hills' face looks rough as he tries to keep it together. Meanwhile, Ceres walks in, cool as ever. while Hills struggles to understand why his stomach is betraying him at the worst possible time. He then suddenly remembered the mushrooms, but there's no way he can move too much right now without, well, you know. Cirrus throws a glance back at him, almost smirking, and casually tells the team he's spotted a ton of traps inside. Without missing a beat, he takes off running and tells everyone to follow his lead. Hills's gut drops further. He yells at Cirrus to stop running, but it's too late. The others had already started to follow, but neither of them knew why they were running. Another gut-wrenching wave hits Hills, and he's super close to losing it. A suspicious cloud wafts through the air, and the team members instinctively cover their noses, assuming it's some kind of toxic gas from the dungeon. But something about the smell seems way too familiar. One of them mumbles under his breath, "Wait, where have I smelled this before? Less talking, more running." Hills snaps, desperately trying to hold everything in, all the while saying if they don't move now, they will all get poisoned. After what feels like an eternity, they finally reach the other side while everyone else is breathless. Cirrus, on the other hand, is looking perfectly fine. However, Hills is looking quite furious. He storms up to Cirrus, practically yelling. He then accuses Cirrus knew about the effect of the mushrooms and that's why he started running. Cirrus looks back, totally sincere, shaking his head, saying he had no idea. Mushroom? What mushroom? Hills glanced at Cirrus, trying to figure out if he was telling the truth. He tugged at his clothes, clearly uncomfortable. And just when things couldn't get more awkward, one of the teammates had the bright idea to bring over a rock for Hills to sit on and rest. Hills, clearly not in the mood, kicked the poor guy away and ordered everyone to stay sharp and keep moving. Sword drawn, he pointed it right at Cirrus, warning him that if he ran off again, he would certainly regret it. One more time, and he will cut him down. From then on, Cirrus continued leading the group, and with him around, they didn't trigger a single trap. They also managed to avoid running into any of the powerful monsters lurking around. Cirrus followed the map's directions, eventually telling the team they were nearing the final trap. However, Hills found it quite odd. The deeper they ventured, the fewer traps they encountered. This was suspicious, and he eyed Cirrus. Could it be that he has been here before? But that didn't make sense. Without their help, Cirrus would have been lunch for that D-ranked monster at the entrance. Cirrus pointed ahead and informed everyone the final boss room was over there. At that moment, Hills's thoughts took a dark turn. If they were already at the boss, then Cirrus had served his purpose. Eyeing a protruding rock above Cirrus's head, Hills quietly activated his skill. A sharp burst of sword energy sliced through the stone, sending it crashing down towards Cirrus. Hills smirked, thinking, an F-ranked hero crushed by a dungeon trap? That sounds about right. But as fate would have it, right before the stone could hit him, something lunged at Cirrus, and the falling rock blocked the attack. Hills's perfectly laid plan fell apart in an instant, and worse yet, the next moment the flying creature slammed right into him, sending him tumbling through the air. Before anyone could process what had happened, a massive purple beast appeared. Its long whip-like tail looked deadly sharp. And the next they knew, the falling stones had completely separated Cirrus from the rest of the group. Hills narrowly escaped death, managing to block the attack just in time with his sword. If he hadn't reacted so quickly, he'd be a goner for sure. But while he was catching his breath, Cirrus found himself trapped on the other side of the rubble. Out of nowhere, a voice came from behind questioning, "What's a human doing here?" As the scene shifts, we see a girl stepping out from the shadows. She looked him up and down, clearly unimpressed, and with a sneer she then called Cirrus disgusting. Meanwhile, the B+ ranked monster they were dealing turns out it be a Kelsang scorpion, a puppet monster controlled by someone named Satiel. Tyler was the first to snap into action, quickly organizing the group to fight back. However, there's one problem for Bella, which is her weapon was a bit too heavy for her. Tyler called the tanks to the front, their massive shields forming a wall. Once everyone was in position, Tyler signaled the archers to fire. A volley of arrows soared through the air, heading straight for the scorpion. But the scorpion, clearly not in the mood, used its pincers to block the shots, looking more annoyed than hurt. Then, with a flick of its massive tail, it shattered the arrows like they were twigs. The gust of wind from that swing was so powerful that the tanks nearly lost their balance. Tyler couldn't believe it. This thing just shrugged off their attack like it was nothing. Just then, Hills returned to the group, his face still a bit pale from his near-death experience. He barked at the group, questioning them, What are they all standing around for? He then ordered everyone to attack all together. Back with Cirrus, he glanced around but didn't see anyone. He wondered if he just imagined that voice. But before he could dwell on it, a long tail shot towards him. He dodged just in time, and a second later, a scorpion came charging at him. Thanks to his boosted stats, Cirrus dodged the attack with ease. Spotting an opening, he circled around to the scorpion's side and swung a punch with the full force of his 4-digit attack power. The punch landed hard, and with just one hit, he shattered the scorpion into pieces. That voice returned, sounding genuinely shocked after seeing a human able to take out her scorpion with one punch. But Cirrus wasn't listening. His mind was somewhere else right now. He needed to focus on the antidote which was in the next room. He couldn't afford to waste any more energy on pointless fights. Just then, a girl stepped out of the shadows, looking at the crumbled remains of the scorpion. A few threads were still attached to it from her hand. She didn't seem all that bothered by its death. In fact, she looked more disgusted than anything. Touched by a human. Gross. Apparently she had planned to ditch the puppet since Cirrus touched it anyway. Cirrus's system flashed revealing her name Satiel, and she was an A+ rank. She let the puppet's strings drop, annoyed that now she might have to get her hands dirty. Originally, she had planned to have the scorpion twist off Cirrus's head, but now, she might have to do it herself. Cirrus tensed up, as he wasn't expecting another female monster. He straightened up, replying that his head wasn't so easy to remove, especially not by her hands. Satiel sneered, telling him to not worry, as she has no intention of touching Cirrus' disgusting body with her hands. While her scorpion puppet continued to fight the team outside, she turned her full attention to Cirrus, ready to deal with him first before moving on to the others. She then lifted one leg. But before she could act, Cirrus changed his mind and shouted, saying he's a hero and he must protect his teammates. Thus, he plans to stay here and fight her. But then mid-sentence his nose started bleeding. I wonder why. Anyway, in the next second, Cirrus activated his system. As soon as it locked onto the target, Satiel's leg was already wrapped around his head, and with one swift motion, she slammed him to the ground. She smirked, clearly unimpressed with Cirrus's strength. What a joke, she thought. But as she gloated, her lust index quietly climbed to 16%. Meanwhile, outside, the team wasn't doing much better. Their weapons were proving useless against the scorpion puppet. Everything they threw at it either shattered on impact or bounced off. But then something strange happened. The scorpion's face started turning red. Tyler noticed this and got a little too excited, thinking their attacks were finally working. Was that really the case, though? Back inside, Cirrus was quickly realizing the massive gap between him and Satiel. She lifted his chin with her toe, a smug grin on her face. Saying Cirrus made it this far, which is pretty impressive for a human, but this is where his story ends. She says that Lord Naya doesn't like humans trespassing in his chambers. Then, without missing a beat, she started toying with him, pressing her toes into his face. Cirrus, feeling the weight of her strength, knew it would be problematic if she got outside, since there's no way the team could deal with her. With a roar of determination, he did something, well, quite unexpected, and he opened his mouth. Satiel's face immediately turned bright red. She hadn't expected anything like this. What are you doing? She screamed, while the system chimed in notifying Cirrus agility plus 220. Well, that escalated quickly. Back outside, another teammate's axe snapped in half as the scorpion effortlessly swatted it away. The scorpion's face was now a deeper shade of red, and the team couldn't figure out why. Bella, on the other hand, was keeping her eyes on the pile of rubble. There hadn't been any sign of movement, and she was starting to worry that maybe, just maybe, Cirrus had been knocked out cold by those falling stones. Bella turned to Tyler, asking him to cover her as she plans to go and get Cirrus out of there. Tyler tried to stop her, but before he could say anything, Bella had already dashed off, thinking to herself, "Cirrus, I'm coming, you'll be okay." But just as she reached the rubble, the scorpion puppet appeared beside her, raising its massive clawed arm, ready to crush her. In a split second, Tyler rushed in and blocked the attack. The force of the blow nearly knocked him off his feet, and it took every ounce of his strength just to hold the scorpion back. Bella, meanwhile, figured that since Cirrus was still a hero after all, he should be fine under a pile of rocks, right? He's a tough guy. Probably. Inside, Satiel, utterly horrified by the fact that Cirrus had slobbered all over her foot, quickly let go of him. She screamed in disgust, calling him a filthy, disgusting human. Cirrus, still coughing and trying to catch his breath, finally managed to break free. Satiel, her face turned super red with both embarrassment and rage, and she was determined to make him pay for that. Cirrus, trying to regain his composure, decided to use one of his skills. But then, the system chimed in telling him no weapon was equipped. Skill unavailable. He mentally kicked himself for not grabbing a weapon earlier, so fighting bare hands was his only option. Cirrus charged Satiel once again, but she effortlessly dodged his attack. In one swift move, she countered with a kick straight to his face, and right as her foot made contact, she had a weird thought. This human's face is surprisingly soft. In the next moment, Cirrus was sent flying several meters through the air. Satiel, still slightly stunned by how satisfying that kick felt, couldn't help but think that was oddly enjoyable. Meanwhile, her lust index had spiked to 54%, and she was definitely not done with Cirrus yet. Satiel rubbed her head, trying to shake off the ridiculous thoughts running through her mind. What the heck was she thinking? She needed to focus. If the humans outside made it to Lord Naya's chamber, things would get really bad. Determined to end this, she summoned thin threads, picked up the scorpion's severed tail, and hurled it straight at Cirrus. Luckily, with his recent agility boost, Cirrus dodged the attack just in time. Seeing his chance, he channeled his magic into his hands and brought a powerful strike down on the tail, slicing it clean in half. But before he could catch his breath, Satiel was already on him. She slammed him to the ground once again, pinning him with her leg. Cirrus gasped for air as she leaned down, telling him there was no escape this time. Meanwhile, with a wicked smile, she tells him that she will strangle him with her legs. Of course, Cirrus wasn't going to just give up. Summoning all his strength, he grabbed her thigh with both hands, determined to show her just how strong his grip was. But instead of causing pain, Satiel let out a startled gasp. She quickly pulled back, kicking him in the face out of pure reflex. She shouted at him to not touch her with his dirty hands. Not wanting to waste any more time, she controlled the two halves of the scorpion's tail, using them to pin Cirrus's hands to the ground. No matter how hard he struggled, the pressure was too much for him to break free. Satiel raised her leg again, preparing to stomp his head into the ground. Time to finish this, she thought, as she began to toy with him, pressing her foot down harder and harder. But at the same time, Cirrus's system notifications started flashing like crazy, rapidly increasing his stats by 2 digits at a time. Satiel, on the other hand, began to feel strange. The more she stomped on Cirrus, the more satisfied she felt. Confused but curious, she wondered aloud, what would it feel like to stomp on the rest of him? Satiel's lust index was still rising, but it was now hitting dangerous levels. In her mind, she kept thinking, humans deserve nothing but to be trampled under her foot. Her fingers twitched slightly, and outside, the scorpion puppet battling Tyler suddenly struck a strange, wobbly pose. Tyler noticed and thought, wait, is this thing losing balance? Are they actually winning? Meanwhile, Satiel was still busy stepping all over Cirrus, pressing down on different parts of his body. But Cirrus's attributes were now skyrocketing, climbing into 3-digit territory. Satiel's lust index, however, wasn't far behind, reaching a critical 89%. Outside, Bella was trying to rush toward the rubble to help Cirrus, but the scorpion's tail whipped toward her. Tyler yelled for her to be careful, but she couldn't dodge in time. She barely blocked the attack with her sword, but the impact sent her flying several meters, landing right next to Hills. Back with Cirrus, he suddenly yelled out, "No, not there!" as Satiel stepped on a particularly sensitive spot. But she ignored him, pressing down even harder. Meanwhile, the scorpion puppet outside shifted its focus to Hills. Hills managed to strike the tail with his sword, but the force sent it crashing into the wall, and he quickly realized they were facing a beast far stronger than he had thought. An elite-level monster for sure. Satiel, now gasping for breath from all the stomping, couldn't help but think, this soft feeling, it's amazing. Her lust index surged even higher, now sitting at 95%. The scorpion, still locked in battle outside, suddenly charged at Hills. Lost in his thoughts about the creature's strength, Hills didn't notice the incoming attack until it was too late. He turned quickly, but not fast enough. The scorpion's claw was about to crush his head, but just as the claw was about to strike, Satiel suddenly let out a loud moan. Outside, the scorpion froze, twitching wildly. The claw stopped midair, inches from Hills's face. He blinked in disbelief, thinking for a second that he had somehow blocked it himself. Green liquid started dripping from the scorpion's mouth, but Hills had no idea what was happening. He just knew this was his chance. Without hesitating, he unleashed his skill, sending waves of sword energy slashing at the scorpion. The powerful attack sent the beast flying. The team erupted in cheers, showering Hills with praise. Meanwhile, Sachel's lust index hit a staggering 98%. She was drooling uncontrollably, and soft moans began escaping her lips. Outside, the scorpion puppet started mimicking her, moaning and drooling too. The team, blissfully unaware, thought the monster was just howling in pain from Hills's strikes. Emboldened by this, Hills figured maybe this monster wasn't as tough as he'd thought. Satyal, however, was losing control. Her body, and the scorpion's, began to twist into strange positions. Hills, now much more confident, strode toward the scorpion and told his team to back off, saying he's got this and he will show them what real A-rank power looks like. Back with Cirrus, Satyal was desperately trying to regain her composure, wondering, what on earth is she doing? Cirrus, still struggling beneath her, could feel her agility and flexibility working against him. He knows he can't keep this up. Her legs were just too much. But even as he struggled, he shouted, saying he wouldn't give in. His words were cut short when Satyal snapped, sealing his mouth with, well, her foot again. She tells him that she doesn't want to hear his dirty voice anymore. At that moment, Cirrus's system flooded him with 3 separate boosts, each one granting him a 4-digit increase in stats. Outside, the scorpion, still drooling like Satyal, launched another attack, this time grabbing Hills's longsword. Not to be outdone, Hills used his signature move, the divine spinning slash. The attack knocked the scorpion back once more. As the beast's body contorted into even stranger shapes, the team assumed Hills had literally knocked the sense out of it. They believed it was time, and they should finish this thing off. Satyal finally lifted her foot off Cirrus, while outside, the team had surrounded the scorpion, cheering louder than ever for Hills. Cirrus's stats continued to climb, now increasing by 3,000, then 4,000 per second. Outside, Hills kept hacking away at the scorpion, proudly declaring he was just that strong. Meanwhile, Satyal's breathing quickened, her lust index building to the breaking point. Suddenly a voice echoed in her mind, "What's all this noise outside?" Satyal's face went pale. It was Lord Naya. Panic flashed through her as she realized she'd forgotten his orders. She needed to deal with these humans now. In an instant, she jumped off Cirrus and regained her composure, her playful, chaotic demeanor vanishing. How could she have lost focus like that? She straightened up, deadly serious now, ready to take care of business. At the same time, Cirrus stood up, his final stat boost kicking in, an insane 10,000 attack power added in one go. The sudden surge of power radiated off him, and a powerful aura exploded which even caught Satyal off guard. For a moment, she was stunned. This can't be the same human she was toying with earlier, she thought. That aura. It's almost like Lord Naya's. The oppressive power rolling off Cirrus was terrifying. Satyal had no idea what was going on, but she was sure that Cirrus wasn't the same defenseless human anymore. He was something far more dangerous, someone who could stand toe-to-toe with Lord Naya himself. She didn't hesitate for even a second. Running was her only option. She quickly spun around and bolted deeper into the dungeon. Cirrus was slightly surprised. After a quick thought, he decided not to chase her. His priority was finding the blood of the demon god in the final boss room. Outside, the team finally managed to take down the scorpion. As everyone celebrated, Bella dashed toward the rubble. Just as she arrived, Cirrus kicked a stone out of the way and walked out. Bella rushed to him, worried, asking if he was hurt, her hands frantically checking him for injuries. Cirrus replied he was fine. Tyler, watching this whole exchange, clenched his fists, visibly irritated, while the others, including Hills, were still caught up in their victory. Feeling pumped from defeating the scorpion, Hills confidently ordered everyone to follow him, saying once again how he's going to show them what real power looks like. Defeating the scorpion had filled him with the belief that he was invincible, and he was even entertaining the idea of soloing the final boss. In his mind, he thought this dungeon was a joke, believing it was probably not even C rank. Heck, it might not even be D rank. The thought of defeating the boss single-handedly was already giving him visions of glory, the money, the recognition, and perhaps even promotion in the guild. Meanwhile, deep within the dungeon, Satyal knelt on one knee, reporting to Lord Naya that a human had appeared. Her voice trembled as she continued by telling him the human used some sort of power to go from weak to incredibly strong in an instant. And she wants Lord Naya to be cautious. Naya's voice cut through the silence, calling out Satyal's name. She looked up at him, however looking terrified. Naya questioned her if she remembered what was his order. Gulping hard, Satyal nervously replied, "To guard the door and make sure no one enters his chamber." Naya's eyes narrowed as he continued saying, "Then why is she here?" Satyal opened her mouth to explain, but before she could even form a sentence, a blinding flash of golden light pierced through her chest, followed by a loud explosion, and Naya's voice rang out, saying he didn't want to hear excuses. Satyal's body crumpled to the floor as she struggled to breathe, but Naya didn't even spare her a second glance. With just a flick of his finger, he tossed her lifeless body into the corner where a pile of dead monsters already lay. "She'll make for good kindling," Naya muttered to himself. Meanwhile, Satyal in her mind saying to herself, she didn't want to die. Naya turned his attention back to the bubbling pool of green liquid in the center of the room. The blood of the demon god was nearly complete, the culmination of countless sacrifices, both human and monster, serving as fuel for the ritual. After all this time, the blood was finally boiling. Just then, the doors to the room were shattered into pieces. Naya's head snapped up as he calmly asked, "Who dares enter his chamber?" It was Hills and his team. With his sword drawn alongside his inflated confidence, Hills stepped forward and declared, "It is him, the hero who will strike fear into Naya's heart." Naya raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed, however, as Cirrus' gaze shifted to the pool of green liquid. The system notification appeared, notifying him, "This is the blood of the demon god. Consuming it will neutralize all toxins in his body." Naya, on the other side, assumed Hills must be the strong human Satyal had warned him about. Seconds later, Hills stepped forward, puffing out his chest and raising his sword high, telling everyone to stand back. He barked at everyone, saying that none shall interfere and he was going to solo this boss all by himself. Meanwhile, Cirrus noticed the blood of the demon god resting on the altar while the magical array on the high platform hummed ominously. Just then, Hills had already charged forward. With a leap, he swung his weapon, declaring it was time for Naya to taste fear. However, Naya was unimpressed and raised a single glowing finger. What followed was a blinding light, and in the next moment, Hill's armor began melting away. As a result, he was flung across the room like a rag doll. The impact left the rest of the team frozen in shock, their heads snapping toward the sight of their captain slammed into the wall. As the team rushed to his side, Naya looked down at them with a sigh of disappointment. Was this the strongest humanity had to offer? She then muttered how pathetic Satyal really was if this was what she deemed scary. She then made it clear this guy wasn't worth her time. Meanwhile, the captain, panting heavily, was just glad to still be breathing. He couldn't believe Naya's attack had shattered his prized A-rank armor in an instant. Thankfully, the S-rank armor he wore inside saved his life. Otherwise, he'd be having a very different conversation with the afterlife. The team helped him up, checking his injuries, while the captain stood there deep in thought. To him, this dungeon clearly wasn't normal. How could the power levels of these monsters be so wildly different? Watching Naya's calm and terrifying presence, he knew he didn't stand a chance in a head-on fight. The only way was to wear her down first. Raising his weapon, the captain barked an order for everyone to charge. Tyler, however, wasn't sold on the idea. He suggested forming ranks first, pointing out that an uncoordinated attack might lead to unnecessary casualties. This was met with Hill's glare. He asked if Tyler was questioning his authority, or worse, defying his orders. Tyler quickly backpedaled, but the captain cut him off and tapped his armor, saying if Tyler wasn't challenging him, he should zip it and follow orders. After all, he was the one in charge. Turning back to the team, the captain gave them a rallying cry, telling them not to fear anything as long as he was standing, and he would be their unshakable shield. Inspired or resigned, the group charged forward with a roar. Naya, hovering above them, dismissed their bravery with a sneer, calling them foolish ants. She decided it was time to remind them of the insurmountable gap between them. Another beam of light was shot out, instantly flooding the room. Before most could react, their bodies were vaporized on the spot. Those who weren't incinerated could only watch in horror as Naya casually waved her hand and seemed bored with their futile efforts. Hills, luckily hanging at the back, rolled out of harm's way in the nick of time, but even his weapon wasn't spared as it had dissolved into useless slag. Naya floated higher, scanning the survivors like a predator deciding which prey to toy with next. Hills gulped hard, realizing with a sinking heart that they had no chance of winning this. Only one thought filled his mind now, which was survival. Without a second look, he bolted toward the entrance, yelling for anyone still breathing to retreat. Tyler, standing amidst the smoldering remains of his teammates, saw the captain already running for his life. Tears welled up in Tyler's eyes as he turned his frustration into fury, calling Hills an arrogant fool. Before he could vent more, Hill's escape was abruptly halted. Someone had grabbed him. Turning back, he found himself under Sirius's icy stare. Our boy reminded him, almost mockingly, of his earlier claim to be the team's unshakable shield. The fight with the boss wasn't over yet, Sirius declared, so the captain wasn't going anywhere. Hills struggled to break free while shouting that as the leader, his orders were absolute. If Sirius wanted to die, he shouldn't drag him along. Meanwhile, Naya, watching with mild amusement, clearly had no plans to let someone who dared break her gate get away so easily. Her finger lifted again and energy began gathering. The captain, seeing this, panicked and tried to run harder, even letting out an embarrassing scream, but even then, he still couldn't break free. He wondered how someone with an F rank could hold him down like this. As Naya's glowing finger aimed at them, the captain, desperate to escape, threw a punch at Sirius, thinking there was no way he couldn't take down someone like Sirius. However, his confidence shattered the moment Sirius effortlessly caught the punch with one hand, then snapped the bone like it was a twig. The captain's scream of pain echoed through the dungeon as Sirius pulled him close and reminded him sharply that a leader's words ought to mean something. With Naya's deadly laser already streaking toward them, Sirius hurled the captain straight into the path of the attack, coldly instructing him to shield the others with his body and give the team time to retreat. Hills collided with the beam mid-air, his scream blending with the sound of the explosion as he was sent crashing to the ground, blood spilling from his mouth. Sirius, unfazed, picked up the broken sword and said it's his turn now. Behind him, Bella and Tyler chose to stay as well. Bella tells Tyler he didn't need to risk his life. She was staying because of Sirius. Tyler, though, shrugged and replied that he knew, however, as the top B-rank hero, he wasn't about to run away, nor did he care to follow any more orders from that idiot of a captain. Meanwhile, Naya, watching the group, slowly raised her finger again. She found it amusing that anyone could witness her power and still choose to stay. To her, this was nothing short of an insult. Sirius didn't waste any time. Using instant slash, he vanished and reappeared right in front of the boss with his blade slashing forward. The speed caught her off guard as she instinctively pulled back her hand, but her cloak wasn't as lucky. A clean cut marred the fabric, and she was surprised by Sirius's incredible speed. Not giving her a second glance, Sirius sprinted toward the altar. Naya wasn't sure why this human suddenly changed target. She then covered her chest, wondering if his true target was the blood of the demon god all along. Her moment of hesitation was enough for Bella and Tyler to seize their chance, lunging at Naya with everything they had. Naya, however, calmly caught their weapons while keeping the other hand protectively over her chest, with her last hand pointing straight at Sirius. Her attention wavered for a split second as Bella pushed forward with all her strength, managing to throw Naya off balance. The attack she had been preparing misfired, veering off course. Sirius ducked under the beam and leaped toward the altar, and the blood of the demon god was within arm's reach. But just as his fingers brushed against the surface of the altar, the magic array around it activated. A powerful force erupted, hurling him backward and crashing hard across the room. Turns out the magical array around the altar was Naya's doing. As long as she was alive, no living creature could step through it. Sirius slowly picked himself up, realizing that charging in headfirst wasn't going to work. He'd have to deal with the boss first. But as he glanced at the wall behind him, something caught his attention. Meanwhile, Naya flung Bella and Tyler aside, sending them crashing hard to the ground. At the same time, Sirius moved closer to investigate the wall. To his surprise, he found the female monster he met earlier cowering in a crevice. Right now, she looked terrified, and Sirius couldn't figure out what happened to her. Satiel, meanwhile, can only pray, hoping that Sirius wouldn't make a sound. She had no desire for Lord Naya to notice her. Meanwhile, Naya, standing tall and radiating power, muttered that she could only continue the ritual with inner peace. Unfortunately for the intruders, she'd have to eliminate them first before paying a visit to their city to burn off her anger later on. Realizing that Bella was in danger, Sirius didn't hesitate. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a kale mushroom he'd picked up earlier, placing it outside the walls. He then dashed back toward the fight. Satiel, peeking out cautiously, instantly recognized it was a rare healing kale mushroom. Hesitating only for a moment, she reached out, grabbed it, and took a bite. Tears welled up in her eyes as the mushroom's effects began to take hold. At that exact moment, Sirius heard a chime in his head. The system cheerfully informed him that Satiel had developed a favorable opinion of him, unlocking new weapon options. A series of cards with glowing question marks suddenly appeared before his eyes. The system eagerly began to explain the rules, but Naya was already raising her hand, aiming straight at his friends. Tyler yelled at Bella to run, but her injured leg left her struggling to move. She shouted for Tyler to leave without her. Cirrus had no time to waste and demanded the system to skip the explanation. The system obediently skipped the explanation and asked him to select a card. In the next moment, a glowing red sword materialized in his hand. What he didn't notice was the name of his new weapon turned out to be the Godly Clothes Exploding Sword. Cirrus leaped high into the air, gripping his new sword tightly. He was determined to let Naya taste its power. But as his blade came down, Naya casually caught it with one hand. Cirrus wasn't expecting this, only to see her smirking. She then mocked him and revealed that this was her plan all along. Raising her other hand, Naya prepared to finish him off, believing there was no way for the human to dodge this time. Cirrus, however, grinned and shouted for her not to underestimate him. He wasn't planning to dodge at all. With a shout, he unleashed his full strength, driving the blade forward. But in the end, his attack had only managed to leave a small cut on Naya's hand. She sneered, taunting that even with all his might, he could barely scratch her. No blood even came out. She began lecturing him about the vast gap between humans and demonic monsters, but before she could finish, her clothes suddenly exploded. A stunned silence fell. Naya froze, her hands instinctively moving to cover her now exposed melons, and in a voice far more feminine than expected, she shrieked, demanding to know what happened. Bella and Tyler, watching from the sidelines, turned bright red, their brains momentarily short-circuited by what had just happened. Meanwhile, Cirrus stood there, his nose inexplicably bleeding. Clearly, our boy suffered some internal damage too. The sword's secret ability had revealed itself. The Godly Clothes Exploding Sword. When it strikes an opponent, it causes their clothes to, well, as the name suggests, it will explode. If the enemy ends up fully exposed, then it will trigger a finishing move. Naya glared at Cirrus and called him a pervert and vowed to end his life for using such an indecent weapon. Cirrus realized he needed to take advantage of the situation. He swung again, but Naya dodged effortlessly. Cirrus quickly realized that every successful hit stripped away part of her outfit. So he'd have to land 2 hits, one on the leg and one on the head, then he can unlock the finishing move. But this wasn't going to make it easy. The system popped up, informing Cirrus that his mana could only support 6 uses of Instant Slash, and each use required a 10-second cooldown. However, targeting a new enemy could reset the cooldown instantly. Cirrus grumbled, calling the ability garbage. The system seemed to take offense and asked him if he wanted to delete the skill. Obviously, Cirrus declined, muttering that it might be trash. But that's all he have for now. Back in the fight, Cirrus activated Instant Slash, aiming for Naya's robes again. However, she's quick on her feet and leaped into the air, narrowly avoiding the strike. Cirrus cursed his bad luck as Naya landed and began piecing together his strategy. She noticed his persistent focus on her legs and realized, with growing outrage, that he was targeting her remaining clothing. Cirrus wasn't done yet, swinging his weapon once more. Naya, furious, called him a disgusting pervert and retaliated by stepping onto his face. That was enough to send Cirrus flying across the place, but he managed to steady himself by stabbing his sword into the ground, skidding to a halt after several meters. His nose throbbed painfully, and he swore it might be broken, but compared to the agony he'd felt from his poison earlier, this was nothing in comparison. Gritting his teeth, he charged once again. Naya, in response, raised a glowing finger to fire another laser. Cirrus, counting down the cooldown in his head, dodged the blast with ease. This surprised her, as she didn't expect Cirrus to dodge her attack at such close range. Her hesitation gave him an opening. This time, he felt his sword connect. He saw some blood. But when he looked up, his heart sank. Naya hovered in the air, her tail coiled beneath her for support. She wasn't down, and if anything, she looked angrier than ever. Naya glared at him. If it weren't for the risk of getting fully exposed, she would have already turned him into ashes. To prove her point, she raised 2 fingers, and Cirrus instantly felt a wave of dread. As the first blast came hurtling toward him, Cirrus managed to backflip out of the way, but the second one came too fast. He tried activating Instant Slash, only for the system to pop up telling him, "Cooldown in progress." Realizing he had no other choice, Cirrus braced himself, gripping his sword tightly. With a mighty swing, he somehow deflected the beam. The resulting shockwave was so intense that Bella and Tyler had to shield their eyes from the debris flying everywhere. Tyler stood frozen, unable to believe what he'd just witnessed. Cirrus, the guy whose combat rank was barely F rank, had deflected an attack from such a powerful boss. Meanwhile, Tyler, a proud B rank, couldn't even find an opening to join the fight. Was this even real? As the dust settled, Cirrus glanced at his sword complimenting its stats. What a fantastic weapon, he muttered, realizing that not only could he dodge Naya's attacks, but he could actually repel them. Naya herself grudgingly admitted that killing Cirrus might be harder than she initially thought, but with a smirk, she raised her other hand, declaring that this didn't mean she couldn't go for the injured woman. Cirrus's eyes widened as Naya aimed at Bella. Without a second thought, he activated Instant Slash the moment its cooldown ended. He went for her hand, and though she pulled back just in time, Cirrus still managed to clip her nail. Naya winced, while Cirrus cursed himself for being too slow. He shouts Bella's name, and at the same time Naya tells him that you humans are always throwing yourselves into these heroic rescue missions, and that's how you humans always get killed. Cirrus knew he wouldn't make it in time. Desperation kicked in, and he decided to lock his target onto Bella, allowing him to cast an Instant Slash once more. In a split-second maneuver, he twisted mid-slash to shatter the incoming beam. The impact was massive, and the shockwave ripped through Bella's chest plate, sending fragments flying. Fortunately, he made it just in time. Naya gritted her teeth. Once again, Cirrus managed to dodge her attack. Suddenly, she noticed the blood of the demon god on the altar had stopped boiling. She was panicking as she'd been so absorbed in the fight that she forgot to maintain the heat. If she didn't fix it quickly, all her efforts would be wasted, and the ritual would fail, forcing her to wait another 100 years to try again. On the other side, Bella began breathing heavily, and she looked so red almost like she was turning into a cooked lobster. Suddenly, the system informed Cirrus with a notification saying that Bella's lust index was at 91%. Bella suddenly grabbed Cirrus by the cheeks, pulling him dangerously close to her face. Her tongue peeked out, and for a moment, it seemed like the two were about to kiss. Just then, an image of an 8-year-old Bella popped into Cirrus's head. The memory was quite unsettling for our boy, to say the least. The first time they met, Bella had smugly asked him if he'd never seen a beautiful girl before, accusing him of staring because he wanted to kiss her. That memory hit Cirrus so hard that he instinctively jerked back, breaking free of the moment. Tyler, watching the scene unfold, was equally stunned. He blurted out, asking Bella what on earth she was doing. Bella, regaining her senses, turned beet red as she realized she'd almost kissed Cirrus, and worse, she had initiated it. Stammering, she spun away, muttering about how mortifying the whole thing was. Tyler, convinced Bella must have been hallucinating due to some sort of poison, reasoned there was no other explanation for her to do such a thing. Meanwhile, Naya returned to the altar, focusing on the ritual. Grabbing a nearby monster corpse, she hurled it into the altar, determined to keep the blood of the demon god boiling. This time, she resolved to burn it all dry, ensuring the ritual succeeded no matter what. Cirrus was horrified hearing this. If she succeeded, he wouldn't get his antidote, so he must stop her. But Naya's speed was overwhelming. Every time he attacked, she dodged effortlessly. Realizing brute force wouldn't cut it, Cirrus decided to get creative. Sprinting over to Bella, he claimed to have a plan to defeat the boss, but he needed her help. What followed was a conversation full of beeping sounds, and it was so outrageous it left Bella blushing like a tomato, and even made Tyler's ears turn red. Tyler gawked at Cirrus, demanding to know how someone could utter such shameless words with such a serious expression. Ignoring the judgmental stares, Cirrus took Bella's hand and asked for her help once more. He understood it might be awkward, but he pleaded with her anyway. Suddenly, Bella's lust index had climbed to a staggering 93%. Tyler, unable to take it anymore, slapped Cirrus's hand away and accused him of trying to take advantage of Bella. He declared that Cirrus was nothing but a pervert and warned Bella not to trust him. To Tyler's absolute shock, Bella softly said she trusted Cirrus. Then, without warning, she lunged at Cirrus, tackling him to the ground. She quickly explained, in the most flustered tone imaginable, that she wasn't doing it because she liked him. This was purely for the sake of defeating the final boss, and not even a little bit of personal feeling. Cirrus simply responded with a quiet, "All right," but just then, the long-forgotten memory surfaced in Cirrus's mind once again. Those embarrassing childhood moments and how Bella would always try to kiss him. The cringe was so overwhelming that it visibly drained the color from his face. Tyler, meanwhile, couldn't take it anymore. He shouted in despair, begging them not to do this kind of thing in front of him. Then, the system notified Cirrus that Tyler had taken critical emotional damage. Just as things spiraled out of control, Cirrus instinctively pushed Bella away again, while crawling backward. Bella, now completely confused, asked why he'd suddenly shoved her. But before Cirrus could explain, his body was enveloped in a glow, and he leveled up with all his attributes increased by 5,000 points. He realized that this certainly was because of Tyler. Honestly, that was fine by him. Anything to avoid recalling more of those horrifying childhood memories. Bella stood back up, ready to continue to get it on. But Cirrus, now calmer and more resolute, told her she didn't need to push herself. If it was that uncomfortable for her, he would handle Naya on his own, assuring her that he would figure something out. Bella called out to Cirrus, asking him to wait. She was worried he still wasn't strong enough to take Naya down, and asked if he really didn't need her help. And right now, her lust index has already hit 99%. Cirrus, with a look of complete disinterest, turned back and flatly said, "No." Bella was stunned. Why didn't Cirrus seem the slightest bit interested in her? She couldn't believe it. Tyler, catching the tension, suddenly spoke up, realizing that Cirrus was far stronger than he had ever imagined. No wonder Bella liked him. But he still had a burning question. Bella, noticing his expression, knew exactly what he wanted to ask. She shot him a quick glance, silently telling him now wasn't the time. Meanwhile, Cirrus dashed forward, fully focused on the fight. He knew that to trigger the final move, he had to land simultaneous strikes on Naya's head and legs. With his stat boosted, he was sure that if he timed his instant slash perfectly, he could pull it off. Naya, on the other hand, was fully absorbed in her ritual, since the blood of the demon god still needed a bit more heat to complete the process. Deciding the humans were the perfect fuel to make up the difference, she didn't even bother covering her up anymore. Hovering in the air, her 4 arms raised high, she declared that letting them become part of her altar's fire was the greatest honor they could hope for. Then, a massive energy sphere began forming above her. Cirrus glanced up and muttered, "Well, that's huge." Whether he meant the energy ball or something else, nobody knew. The next second, the energy shot straight at him. He braced himself, holding his sword up to block the attack. The force pushed him back, his feet dragging across the ground. His mana drained rapidly, dropping by hundreds by the seconds. Gritting his teeth, he managed to deflect the attack. By now, his mana reserves were nearly depleted. Desperation washed over him. Without mana, he couldn't activate any skills. Naya noticed what was happening, laughed coldly, and declared it was over for him. But before Cirrus could respond, Bella grabbed his face and pulled him into her. Softly, she whispered, "You clearly need my help." Tyler, standing nearby, felt his world crumble while Bella gave him the "you were like a brother to me" card. The system suddenly chimed in, saying Tyler was heartbroken. Bella had already told Tyler before, and her heart had belonged to someone since childhood, and that hadn't changed. The moment Bella hugged Cirrus, his level skyrocketed, and he instantly gained 5 levels. A surge of power flooded his body, boosting his stats by a staggering 27,500 points, and soon, energy radiated from him in fiery waves. Naya, witnessing this, shouted in disbelief. Where was this power coming from? How could a mere human still have this kind of strength left? Cirrus, now glowing with energy, charged back into the fray. Naya sneered, convinced she could dodge whatever attack he had planned. But this time, she didn't. Cirrus's sword struck both her mask and robe in one clean motion. Her mask cracked, revealing a new wound across her face. She roared in fury, "How dare you scar my face!" Fueled by rage, she summoned an even larger energy sphere above her, pouring all her power into it. Cirrus, on the other hand, raised his sword high and prepared to use his final move. Naya unleashed her energy sphere, but Cirrus's blade cut through it effortlessly. The slash didn't stop there. It tore through the ground itself, sending chunks of rock flying. Naya was blasted across the room, skidding violently before coming to a stop. Even Bella and Tyler were thrown back by the shockwave. As the dust settled, Naya lay motionless, and Cirrus finally allowed himself to breathe a sigh of relief. But his victory was short-lived. As he ran toward the altar, he noticed the magical array was still active. It was then we noticed that Naya wasn't actually dead. She weakly lifted her head, glaring at him, saying she wouldn't let filthy humans touch the blood of the demon god. Cirrus steadied himself and began walking toward Naya again, but his skills was still in cooldown. However, when he heard Tyler calling Bella's name, he turned around and realized her health bar was dangerously low, and the system flashed a grim warning informing him that Bella was in critical condition and imminent death. Suddenly, Naya staggered to her feet, glaring with defiance. She hissed that as long as she lived, she would never let Cirrus succeed. Cirrus didn't hesitate. Ignoring her threat, he made his choice. Between Naya and Bella, he chose Bella. Scooping her into his arms, he grabbed Tyler with one hand and charged toward the dungeon exit at full speed. Behind him, Naya collapsed again, sighing in disbelief. She muttered about how foolish humans were, laughing weakly at Sirius's retreat. Sirius opened the system map, frantically searching for the nearest exit. He had to reach the guild hospital before it was too late. As he sprinted, a monster suddenly appeared, blocking their path. Bella stirred slightly in his arms. Memories from her childhood surfaced, being teased by other kids for being ugly. One child even beat his chest and called her a gorilla. Another yanked Sirius's sleeve, warning him not to get close to Bella, or he'd become a freak too. But Sirius had refused, shoving the kid aside without hesitation. Back in the present, Sirius, still holding Tyler with one arm, then swung his sword, cutting down the monster with ease. Activating an instant slash, he dashed past the obstruction and pushed forward. Another memory flashed in Bella's mind, young Sirius ignoring the taunts of other kids and smiling at her instead. He told her their game wasn't over yet, then kissed her forehead and promised he'd take responsibility for her. More monsters appeared, but Sirius cut them down one by one. He could feel Bella's life slipping away and whispered urgently that everything would be okay. Meanwhile, back at the altar, Naya was at her limit. The temperature still wasn't high enough. Realizing she had no other options, she made a desperate decision. With a final glance at the altar, she threw herself into the ritual flames, her body starting to dissolve. She muttered that she could no longer serve her demon lord in person. On the other side, Sirius struck down another monster, but just as the monster fell, Sirius's sword vanished. The system chimed in saying enemy defeated. The weapon returned to the system. Next retrieval in 12 hours. Confused but with no time to ponder, Sirius pressed on. Ahead, the exit finally came into view. Outside was a group of survivors gathered, including Hills. The man looked worse for wear. His teeth were nearly gone, and his S-rank soft armor was non-existent. Muttering under his breath, Hills blamed Sirius for everything. A nearby teammate sighed, speculating that Sirius had probably been killed by the boss already. Suddenly, they heard hurried footsteps behind them. Turning, they saw Sirius emerge, alive and carrying Bella and Tyler. The group gasped in disbelief, but Hill's face twisted in anger. Snatching a sword from a teammate, he accused Sirius of sneaking behind them, disobeying his orders, and retreating from the dungeon. He declared that Sirius would be stripped of his position in the team and barred from using the guild's medical resources. Sirius didn't even bother responding. Without breaking stride, he stomped on douchebag's face, pinning him to the ground. Coldly, he tells him he didn't have time for his nonsense. This caused Hill's remaining teeth, what little he had left, to fly out with a crunch. Still carrying Bella and Tyler, Sirius sprinted off toward the hospital. The stunned group watched him go until someone wrinkled their nose, sniffing the air. Turning over the captain, they recoiled in horror. One teammate shouted, "Oh no!" Sirius kicked the shit out of him. Literally.